A heart open to love. There are moments in life when you think you have everything planned, when you believe you know exactly where your path is leading. And then suddenly, life shifts, sending you down a road you never expected. For Emma Carter, that road was surrogacy, a journey she had taken twice before, bringing joy and life to two families who had once thought they'd never have children of their own. This time, though, things felt different. Emma had always been known for her kind heart and giving spirit. In her small Midwest town, people spoke of her warmth and generosity, the way she always showed up when someone needed help. She wasn't wealthy, nor was she famous, but she had something far more valuable, a deep belief that everyone deserved a chance at happiness. That's what had led her to Jake and Mia Reynolds. The couple had reached out through a mutual friend, their story one of hope and heartbreak. After 6 years of marriage, they had tried everything: IVF, hormone treatments, even adoption. But every attempt ended in disappointment. Doctors had told Mia that carrying a pregnancy was impossible. When they met Emma, it felt like destiny. Their first meeting was over coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. Emma could still remember the way Mia's hands shook as she stirred her tea, the way Jake sat silently, a quiet storm of emotions behind his serious expression. "We've dreamed about this for so long," Mia had said, her voice thick with unused tears. "We just need someone to help us bring our babies into the world." Emma had seen that longing before, in the couple she had cared for before. It was a familiar kind of ache, the kind that only those who had known loss could understand. And in that moment, she knew. "I want to do this for you," Emma had said, reaching across the table to take Mia's hand. Mia had let out a broken sob, gripping Emma's fingers as if she were a lifeline in an endless sea of heartbreak. Jake, always composed, simply nodded. But the way his jaw clenched, the way he blinked rapidly like he was holding back tears, said more than words ever could. This wasn't just a surrogacy agreement. It was a second chance at the life they had been denied, a bond unlike any other. The legal paperwork and medical procedures came next. The embryos, created from Jake and Mia's genetic material, were transferred into Emma's womb. Then came the waiting, the anxious anticipation of whether the pregnancy would take. When the test came back positive, they all cried. From that moment on, Jake and Mia were involved in everything. They came to every doctor's appointment, marveling at the ultrasound images of their growing babies. Jake, normally quiet and analytical, would sit in awe as he watched the flickering heartbeats on the screen, while Mia bombarded the doctors with endless questions, desperate to learn every little detail about the pregnancy. They joined childbirth classes, laughing with Emma as they awkwardly practiced holding baby dolls and learning breathing techniques. Emma had cared for couples before, but she had never experienced a connection quite like this one. Mia texted her daily, checking in, offering to bring food, sending voice messages filled with excitement. Jake was more reserved, but his actions spoke louder than words. After every appointment, he left small gifts on Emma's porch, her favorite snacks, pregnancy pillows, even a handwritten letter once, thanking her for giving them hope. It was overwhelming, this love they already had for their babies. It reminded Emma why she did this. Because sometimes the greatest happiness comes from giving someone else a chance at theirs, the first sign of change. It wasn't until Emma was 8 months pregnant that she noticed the shift. At first, it was subtle, a missed phone call, a delayed text response. Then it became undeniable. Mia, once so involved, had stopped asking about baby names. Jake, who never missed an appointment, had started canceling last minute. At first, Emma told herself not to overthink it. Maybe they were just busy preparing. Maybe they were overwhelmed. After all, bringing twins into the world was a huge life change. But then the gifts stopped, the excitement faded, and the silence stretched on longer than Emma was comfortable with. One evening, as she sat in the nursery, surrounded by baby clothes Mia had given her months ago, She found herself staring at her phone, wondering why the messages had stopped. She gently rubbed her swollen belly, feeling the kicks of the little ones inside her. Had she imagined their excitement? Had she been too hopeful, too trusting? Or was something terribly wrong? A question with no answer. When the due date approached, Emma finally worked up the courage to call Mia. Voicemail. She tried Jake. Voicemail. Her stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Determined to believe in the love she had seen in their eyes, she packed her hospital bag the night before the scheduled C-section, reminding herself that they wouldn't miss this. They couldn't. They had dreamed of this for so long. They had wanted these babies more than anything. Didn't they? The moment that changed everything. The morning of the C-section arrived with a crisp chill in the air. Emma woke early, trying to ignore the dread in her chest. The hospital was only a short drive away. She had triple-checked her bag, ensuring everything was ready. But as she gathered her things, she checked her phone one last time, hoping for a text or call. Nothing. Emma arrived at the hospital alone. She told herself that maybe they were just running late. Maybe their phones had died. Maybe. A nurse with kind eyes noticed her looking toward the door. "Is someone coming to support you?" the woman asked gently. Emma forced a smile. Yes. The parents. They're probably just on their way. The nurse nodded, but there was something in her expression. A quiet understanding, a concern she didn't voice. Minutes turned into hours. Emma was prepped for surgery, her heart pounding. And still, they never came. She lay on the operating table, eyes locked on the ceiling, trying to push back the heartbreak threatening to consume her. She had been here before, but never like this. The doctor's voice was calm. "Okay, Emma, are you ready?" She swallowed hard. "I don't have a choice, do I?" Then, the first cry filled the air. Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The doctor lifted a tiny, squirming baby girl, her skin flushed pink, her lungs strong. Moments later, her twin sister followed, just as healthy and vibrant. Tears streamed down Emma's face. "They're perfect," she whispered. But as she looked around, as she waited for the door to burst open, for Jake and Mia to arrive, smiling, crying, ready to hold their children, she realized something. She was alone. And for the first time, she truly understood. They weren't coming. The silence that said everything. There are moments in life that change everything. Moments where time slows, where every breath feels heavier, where reality shifts so suddenly that you struggle to keep up. For Emma Carter, that moment came as she lay in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the first cries of the babies she had carried for 9 long months. They were here. 2 perfect, beautiful baby girls, their voices filling the sterile air of the hospital room. But no one else was. No Jake. No Mia. Just Emma. And in that silence, in that aching emptiness where their parents should have been, Emma knew. They weren't coming. Waiting for the unbelievable. She tried to convince herself otherwise at first. Maybe they had an emergency. Maybe there was traffic. Maybe. Excuses filled her mind as the doctors worked around her, gently congratulating her as they finished the C-section. "We're going to move you to recovery now," one of the nurses, Carla, said softly, her voice warm and kind. "Do you want to hold them?" Emma hesitated. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. She was supposed to be handing them to their parents right now, watching as Jake and Mia cried tears of joy, as they whispered promises of love to the babies they had longed for. Instead, she was alone, holding the weight of a future she hadn't planned for. She swallowed hard, blinking back the sting of tears. "Yes," she whispered. And then, they were in her arms. 2 tiny girls, swaddled in soft pink blankets, their skin still warm from the world they had just entered. They didn't know. They had no idea that the people who had begged the universe for them were no longer here. They just nestled into Emma's warmth, instinctively trusting her. As she looked down at them, something inside her shifted. She had been a surrogate before. She knew how to love without attachment, how to separate her heart from the baby she carried. But this was different. Because this time, the ones who were supposed to love them weren't here. And suddenly, Emma wasn't sure if she could let them go. The questions no one could answer. Hours passed. No call, no message, nothing. Carla, the nurse who had been with Emma since the beginning of labor, finally sat beside her bed with a clipboard. "I don't want to pressure you," she said gently, "but we need to know what's going on. We've tried calling both parents, and there's been no response." Emma's stomach churned. "What does that mean?" Carla hesitated. "It means that, legally, we don't have a designated guardian for these babies right now. We need someone to take responsibility for them." The words hit like a physical blow. Emma had spent 9 months preparing to let them go. She had never imagined she would be the one left holding them. "What happens if they don't show up?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carla sighed. "If no one claims them, the hospital will have to notify child services. The babies will be placed into foster care." Foster care. Emma felt sick. These babies weren't unwanted. They weren't orphans. They had parents. Parents who had cried over their ultrasound photos. Parents who had planned nurseries. Parents who had sworn they would love them forever. So where were they now? And why had they disappeared? A face from the past. It was nearly midnight when Emma finally got an answer. She was sitting in her dimly lit hospital room, one baby in her arms, the other sleeping beside her in a bassinet. Then, out of nowhere, she saw movement through the glass window of her door. Her breath caught. Jake. He stood in the hallway, his face pale, his posture stiff. Emma's heart pounded. Finally, she thought. He's here. For a moment, hope flickered inside her. Maybe something had happened, some emergency that had kept them away. Maybe he was here now to explain everything, to tell her it had all been a misunderstanding. But then, he didn't come inside. He didn't even look through the door. Instead, he turned sharply and disappeared into a doctor's office, closing the door behind him. Emma's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. A truth too painful to believe. Half an hour later, Carla returned with the hospital's head physician, Dr. Harris. Emma knew, before they even spoke, that whatever they were about to say would change everything. "Emma," Dr. Harris said gently, "we spoke with Jake." Emma's pulse thundered in her ears. "Where's Mia?" Dr. Harris and Carla exchanged a glance. Then he said the words that shattered everything. "They're getting a divorce." Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. "What?" "They made the decision a few days ago," Dr. Harris continued. "Jake said they." He hesitated, then sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He said they aren't emotionally or financially prepared to be parents anymore. Emma felt like she had been punched in the chest. They had begged for these babies. They had cried over their empty nursery, had spent years dreaming of this moment. And now, they were just walking away. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely there. Dr. Harris was silent for a long moment. Then, "If no one steps forward," he said, "the babies will go into the system." The moment she made a choice, Emma looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. The baby that Mia had once cried over. The baby that Jake had once left letters for. The baby that no one else wanted now. Foster care. Separated. Raised by strangers. Emma's heart twisted painfully. These babies had done nothing wrong. They had been wanted, loved, cherished, and now they were being abandoned before they even had a chance to be held by their parents. Tears burned in her eyes. She had carried them for 9 months, had felt every kick, every flutter, had protected them with her own body. And now, could she really just let them go? Or did she have the strength to do the impossible? Carla placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide right now," she whispered. But Emma already knew. She looked down at the baby girl in her arms, her tiny fingers curling around Emma's thumb. And in that moment, she whispered the words that would change her life forever. "I won't let them go." A decision that changed everything. There are moments that define who we are, not the moments we plan for, but the ones that catch us off guard, forcing us to make a choice that will alter the course of our lives forever. For Emma Carter, that moment had come. She had carried these babies for 9 long months, feeling their every movement, knowing they were never meant to be hers. She had been ready to say goodbye, to watch their parents take them home, to see the joy in their eyes as their dream of a family became reality. But now, that reality had shattered. Jake and Mia were gone, and Emma was the only one left. She had no plan for this. No nursery, no savings meant for 2 extra lives, no roadmap on how to raise twins as a single woman. But as she looked down at the tiny girl in her arms, her small chest rising and falling, her little fingers wrapped tightly around Emma's thumb, she knew one thing. She couldn't walk away. She wouldn't let them be abandoned. And so, with a steadying breath, she made her choice. "I won't let them go." Carla, the nurse who had been by her side through it all, squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'll get the paperwork started," she whispered. But even as the words left her mouth, Emma knew this was only the beginning. The weight of motherhood. The first few days were a blur. Emma had expected chaos, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer exhaustion of caring for 2 newborns alone. Every 2 hours, they needed to be fed. Diapers needed to be changed constantly. Crying became the background noise of her life. She barely slept. By the 3rd night, she was running on nothing but sheer willpower. She sat on the small hospital couch, cradling one baby in her arms while rocking the other in a bassinet with her foot. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red from lack of sleep, and every muscle in her body ached from the C-section that was still healing. And yet, despite all of it, she felt something she hadn't expected. Love. A fierce, protective kind of love that wrapped around her like a shield, stronger than exhaustion, stronger than doubt. She had spent months carrying these babies for someone else, never expecting to keep them. But now, they were hers. And for the first time, she let herself believe it. A visit from the past. It was 4 days after the birth when Jake finally showed up again. Emma was still in the hospital, sitting in a rocking chair, gently soothing one of the babies while the other slept. She was exhausted, but more at peace than she had been in days. Then, a knock at the door. She turned her head, and there he was. Jake, looking nothing like the man she had met 9 months ago. He seemed older, his face drawn and pale, his usually sharp suit replaced by wrinkled jeans and a hoodie. His eyes, once filled with hope, now held something darker, guilt. Emma's heart pounded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, Jake broke the silence. "Hey," he said quietly. Emma looked down at the baby in her arms. "You're late." Jake let out a sharp breath, rubbing his hands over his face. "I know." There was so much she wanted to say, so many questions, so much hurt. But instead she waited. Finally, he sighed. "I owe you an explanation." Emma didn't answer. She just stared at him, waiting for him to say something that would make sense, something that would make the betrayal feel less unbearable. Jake let out a slow breath. "Mia's gone." Emma frowned. "Gone." "She left," he said, voice hollow. "Right after we made the decision to divorce. She packed her things and flew out to California to stay with her sister." Emma's stomach twisted. "And she just left the babies, just like that." Jake closed his eyes, as if saying it out loud made it more real. "We both did." Emma felt anger rising in her chest. "You didn't leave them. You abandoned them." Jake flinched, but didn't argue. He looked at the baby in her arms, the baby that was supposed to be his. A ghost of pain flickered across his face. "I'm not ready," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Emma swallowed hard. "Do you think I am?" she asked. Jake looked up, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Emma. I swear. But Mia and we thought having kids would fix everything. We thought." He let out a shaky breath. "We were wrong." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "So what? You just decided that since your marriage was falling apart, these babies didn't matter anymore." Jake's face crumpled. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't think I can." Emma's hands tightened around the baby. "You had a choice," she whispered. "And you made it." She stood up, ignoring the ache in her body, and walked over to the bassinet where the other twin was sleeping. "You think I know how to do this?" she asked, turning back to face him. "I didn't plan for this either, Jake. I didn't sign up to be their mother. But they're here, and I will never walk away from them." Tears glistened in Jake's eyes, but he didn't move closer. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "If you're really sorry," she said, "then sign the papers. Make it official. Give up your rights so I can make sure they never end up in the system." Jake's face twisted with emotion. "Emma, No," she cut him off. "You don't get to hesitate now. Either be their father, or let me be their mother. But you don't get to leave them in limbo because you're scared." Jake looked at her for a long time. Then slowly he nodded. "I'll sign them," he whispered. Emma felt something inside her settle. Relief. Because now, there was no turning back. A mother's promise. That night, Emma sat by the hospital window, holding both babies close. She had come into this expecting to leave empty-handed. Now she was leaving with 2 lives in her arms. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she was strong enough, prepared enough, ready enough. But as she looked down at the faces of the tiny girls who had been left behind, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never leave them. She would fight for them, love them, protect them. She would give them the life they deserved, because they weren't just someone else's dream anymore. They were hers. And nothing, not fear, not uncertainty, not the past, would ever change that. A love that chose to stay. The hardest decisions in life aren't always the ones you plan for. Sometimes they arrive unannounced, demanding an answer when you feel least prepared. But the thing about life, the thing that Emma Carter had come to understand, is that it doesn't wait for you to be ready. It just happens. And now here she was, leaving the hospital with 2 baby girls she had never expected to keep. As she walked out of the hospital doors, her heart pounded. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a storm cloud, heavy, unpredictable, full of unknowns. But she didn't turn back. She tightened her grip on the 2 tiny lives she had vowed to protect. And she stepped forward. The first night home, her house had never felt so different. It had always been a place of warmth, a sanctuary built on routine and quiet simplicity. But now it was filled with soft cries, tiny yawns, the scent of baby powder and milk. She laid the girls down in the bassinet she had bought on the way home. A purchase made in a daze, her mind still catching up with the reality of what she had chosen to do. She was a mother now. Not by accident. Not by default. By choice. That night, as she sat beside them, she whispered words she had never imagined saying. "I don't know if I'll be good at this," she admitted softly, stroking one of their tiny hands. "But I promise you, I will never leave you." One of the babies let out a sleepy sigh, her tiny fingers curling around Emma's. And Emma knew they believed her. Fears and firsts. The first few weeks were chaos. Emma had no time to question herself, no room for doubt. She was up every 2 hours for feedings, fumbling through diaper changes, learning how to calm 2 crying infants at once. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and completely in over her head. But she was not broken. Every time she wanted to give in to doubt, she reminded herself they had no one else. So she learned. She learned how to tell their cries apart, how to hold one in each arm without dropping them, how to function on 3 hours of sleep and still sing lullabies at sunrise. She learned what it meant to love without limits. And little by little, her fear turned into something else. Something stronger. Something unshakable. An unexpected visit. It was a month later when she heard a knock at her door. Emma's breath caught. She wasn't expecting anyone. With one baby in her arms and the other sleeping in the bassinet, she hesitated before walking to the door and opening it. Jake. He stood there, hands in his pockets, looking every bit as uncertain as she had expected. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, he let out a shaky breath. "Can I see them?" Emma studied him carefully. She had spent weeks convincing herself she didn't need closure, that it didn't matter why he had left. But now, looking at him, the father who had chosen to walk away, she realized she had one last thing to say. "You had a choice, Jake," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "I know. And you made it." He swallowed hard, nodding. Emma sighed, adjusting the baby in her arms. "They don't need you now," she said, her voice steady. "And neither do I." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was just the truth. Jake nodded again, this time with understanding. "Take care of them," he whispered. "I will," she said, without hesitation. And with that, she closed the door. A love that stayed. Life didn't get easier overnight. But Emma didn't need it to be easy. She just needed it to be worth it. And it was. The twins grew, faster than she could have imagined. Their first smiles, their first giggles, the first time they reached for her hand. Each moment a reminder that she had made the right choice. She had not given birth to them expecting to be their mother, but she had chosen them. She had stayed when no one else had. And because of that, they were loved. Not because they were planned. Not because they were expected. But because they were wanted. Because sometimes the greatest families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose. And Emma had chosen them. Forever. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.